Please, she's just a little girl. Ethan's voice cracked, desperate as he reached out toward the officers storming into his home. But it was too late. The door shattered, flashbangs went off, and the chaos unfolded in an instant. The smoke cleared. His daughter, Sophia Matthews, lay motionless on the floor caught in the crossfire of a botched raid. A mistake. They raided the wrong house. But the damage was done. Ethan fell to his knees, holding her lifeless body in his arms. Her small fingers, once filled with laughter, now cold. The officers tried to apologize, their voices trembling with guilt, but it didn't matter. By the time the sun set, Ethan Matthews had made a decision. He would make them pay. No badge, no shield would save them. One by one, he'd hunt them down until justice was served. Everything happened so fast. One moment, Ethan was sitting on the couch, watching TV with Sophia, his 15-year-old daughter, curled up beside him, reading a book. The next, the silence of their apartment was shattered by the deafening boom of the flashbang. His heart pounded in his chest. Confusion. Panic. His blood ran cold as he heard heavy footsteps on the other side of the door, followed by loud, commanding voices. The officers had come in full force. He hadn't heard the footsteps. He hadn't seen the shadows creeping past the door. But now, they were there, crashing through the space he called home. The sound of the door being kicked in was like a punch to his gut, too loud to be real, too unreal to ignore. "Police, get down!" They shouted, but there was no time to react. Flashing lights painted their walls, cutting through the darkness of their living room. Ethan leaped to his feet, reaching for his daughter, but before he could even grab her hand, the flashbangs went off. The light blinded him. The heat stung his face, searing his eyes as the room exploded in a blaze of color. The deafening pop of the flashbang sent shockwaves through his eardrums, and for a moment, everything was drowned in white noise. His hands shot up instinctively to shield his eyes, but the blinding light and the harsh smell of burning smoke made it impossible to see anything. The officers didn't give him a chance to recover. They rushed into the room, their weapons drawn and their voices lost in the chaos. The whole apartment felt like it was spinning out of control. Ethan barely registered what was happening as he stumbled toward Sophia, who had frozen, her wide eyes locked onto the flash of lights filling the apartment. "Sophia, get down!" Ethan screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the sounds of boots pounding against the floor. They were here for someone, but not for them. He saw one of the officers through the haze of smoke. The man's face was hardened, a mask of determination. Ethan tried to move closer to his daughter, but before he could even reach her, a loud bang rang out. A shot. The sound echoed in the apartment, sharp and final. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He turned just in time to see his daughter fall, her small body crumpling to the floor with a sickening thud. Blood stained the carpet beneath her. "Sophia!" Ethan screamed. He stumbled forward, his heart pounding so hard in his chest that it felt as though it might explode. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he touched her limp body. Blood, so much blood. Her eyes stared up at him, wide open, still filled with shock. The girl who had just been smiling, who had laughed as they sat together, was gone. The officers froze. The realization hit them all at once. A mistake. They had come for the wrong target. "No," Ethan cried, holding his daughter's head against his chest. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His daughter, his little girl, was gone, and all he could do was hold her. Hold her and scream, even though he knew it would change nothing. The officers stood there, motionless, unable to speak. They looked at the scene, their hands still clutching their weapons, but none of them moved. In that moment, the weight of what had just happened settled over them. The door to the apartment was still wide open. Ethan could hear shouting from outside, more officers scrambling, but none of that mattered. Nothing mattered. His world had shattered. You killed her." Ethan's voice cracked with fury. He could barely form words, his throat tight, his whole body trembling with the rush of emotions flooding him. He wanted to scream at them, to make them feel the weight of what they had done. But instead, he just held her. He could do nothing else. Sophia's body was still warm, but already her life had slipped away. A voice cut through the air. One of the officers, his tone unsteady, spoke up. "Sir, we're so sorry. It was a mistake. We came for a suspect in—" "A mistake?" Ethan's voice rose again, dangerously low. He pulled his daughter's body closer to him, his fingers digging into her lifeless skin. "A mistake? You don't just kill someone because of a mistake." The officer tried to approach him, his hands outstretched as if to comfort, but Ethan didn't want comfort. He didn't want apologies. The damage was done. His daughter was dead. "She's just a little girl." Ethan screamed, his anger seeping into his words. But the officer's words fell on deaf ears. Not another officer stepped forward, his face pale. He spoke quietly, trying to assure Ethan. "We'll make sure this is handled. We'll take care of everything, sir." But none of their words mattered. They had taken everything from him. The realization hit Ethan hard. He felt his heart stop. They killed her. He looked down at her once more, his hands trembling as he touched her face, willing himself not to break. But the grief was too heavy. The rage began to rise in him, a cold fire that consumed him, filling the void where his daughter's smile had once been. Ethan looked up at the officers, his jaw tight with fury. "You don't get to walk away from this." The officers backed off slightly, sensing the danger in his voice. But it was already too late. Ethan didn't care about their apologies or their promises to fix things. He didn't care about the law. They had taken her from him, and now he would make them pay dot in that moment. Ethan Matthews made a vow to track down each and every officer involved in the raid and make them feel the loss he felt. One by one, they would answer for what they had done. And with that, his journey of vengeance began. The walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in on Ethan as he knelt beside his daughter's lifeless body. The sound of his heart pounding was the only thing he could hear, drowning out everything else, the officers' apologies, the static in the air, the flashing lights outside. He couldn't make sense of what had just happened. His mind was a whirlwind of images. Sophia's laughter, her innocent smile, the way she had been when she was alive. And now, all that was left was this cold emptiness. His hands were shaking as he gently caressed her face. His tears mingled with the blood on her skin, but no amount of grief could bring her back. He had failed her. He was supposed to protect her, and now she was gone. The officers didn't know what to say. One stepped forward, his face pale and remorseful. "Sir, we'll make sure the department takes full responsibility." Full responsibility. Ethan's chest tightened, and a sharp breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched into fists. He wanted to shout, to scream at them, to make them feel the pain that was tearing him apart from the inside. But instead, his voice was low, trembling with emotion. "Full responsibility? You killed her. You killed my daughter." The officer recoiled slightly, not knowing how to respond. Ethan's rage was a tidal wave, but it wasn't just the anger at the officers. It was the helplessness, the feeling of powerlessness that flooded his every vein. He looked down at Sophia again, her small body so fragile, now forever still. The injustice of it was too much. They had raided the wrong house. They had killed an innocent child because of a mistake, a tragic, irreversible mistake. And Ethan knew deep down there was no system in place that would bring her back. No apology could fix this dot. Ethan forced himself to stand, his legs unsteady as he staggered toward the window. The flashing lights of the police cruisers outside reflected off the glass, a painful reminder of the chaos that had invaded his life. He leaned against the windowsill, his eyes burning with unshed tears, but he didn't let them fall. No, he couldn't cry anymore. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The justice system would fail him. The officers would be investigated. The department would issue a statement, and life would go on. But nothing would change. No one would be held truly accountable. The system had failed him before, and it would fail him again. The officers, the ones responsible for his daughter's death, would walk away with their careers intact, their lives untouched. His grief began to shift, morphing into something darker, something he couldn't control. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles ached. His body trembled with anger, but it wasn't just any anger. It was a burning, seething fury that was growing inside him, filling every corner of his being. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a promise to Sophia, to his little girl. They would pay, The officers might walk away, but Ethan Matthews was done sitting idly by. He was done trusting a broken system that would let this slide. His eyes hardened, a cold fire igniting in his chest. There was no more mourning, no more weeping. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about vengeance. He couldn't let them get away with it. Not this time. "I'll make them pay." The words escaped his lips before he could even stop them, and the weight of what they meant hit him hard. He wasn't going to wait for justice. He would bring it himself. Ethan didn't know where to start. He didn't know how to begin, but that didn't matter. The first step would be the hardest, but after that, it would be unstoppable. He had been a soldier once, a man trained to track down threats, a man who could kill without hesitation. The rage that burned inside him was the same rage he had used to keep enemies in check. But now, that anger was focused solely on the men who had taken everything from him. He grabbed his jacket from the chair and walked out of the apartment. He didn't even notice the officer still standing behind him, watching. The pain was still there, raw and unbearable, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of determination. His daughter was dead, but he would make sure that everyone who was responsible felt the same weight of loss. One by one, he would track them down. One by one, he would hunt them down until they felt the unbearable emptiness that had hollowed him out. And then, only then, would his grief be satisfied. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the city, but Ethan Matthews had already been awake for hours. He hadn't slept since that night, and as the day began to break, he sat in his car, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The apartment was gone, nothing but an empty shell now. Sophia's laughter, still, echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder of what had been taken from him. Justice. It was a word he once believed in, a word he had fought for. But now, as he stared blankly at the street, he knew it was a lie. The system had failed him. The officers involved in his daughter's death would face an investigation, sure. But would they face real consequences? Would any of them pay the price for their actions? Ethan knew the answer. No doubt his fists clenched in the silence of his car, the anger inside him bubbling up once more. His mind replayed the events from that night, the flashbangs, the guns, the cold, lifeless body of Sophia. It was a mistake, they said, an accident. But accidents don't kill little girls. Mistakes don't tear families apart. He had been a soldier once, a man trained to hunt, to track, to fight. And now, as he sat there in the car, the years of discipline and control seemed so distant. But the anger? That was right in front of him. It was all-consuming. He remembered the man he used to be, calm, collected, a protector. The military had molded him into someone who fought for the greater good. But that man was gone. He was buried beneath the weight of his grief, and in his place was a man who no longer cared for right or wrong. A man who only cared about revenge. They would pay. Ethan pulled out a notebook from the glove compartment, the pages filled with scribbled names, addresses, and phone numbers. He had spent hours after the raid gathering everything he could find. Officer James Holloway, the one who fired the fatal shot. Detective Sarah Monroe, who had overseen the raid. Captain Edward James, the man who had orchestrated it all. Every officer involved was now a target. He turned the page. There in bold letters was the name that had haunted him the most, Captain Edward James. He was the one who had led the raid, the one who had signed off on the operation. Ethan's eyes narrowed. If there was anyone who deserved to feel the weight of what they had done, it was James. He remembered the calm way James had stood in the apartment, the officer's face pale, but his voice steady as he muttered his apologies. That calmness had burned Ethan alive with rage. It was a stark contrast to the horror Ethan had felt holding his daughter in his arms. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. A text from an unknown number. "I know who you're after. I can help. Meet me at the warehouse on 3rd Street. Ethan stared at the message for a moment, unsure of what to make of it, but he didn't care. Whoever it was, they knew something. He needed information, and he would take whatever help was offered, even if it came from the shadows. With a deep breath, Ethan put the car in gear and started driving. The warehouse was located on the edge of town, a place where rusted metal walls and broken windows were the norm. As he stepped out of the car, Ethan felt the weight of the decision that had already been made. This wasn't just about finding the officers. It was about ending this nightmare, about making them feel the pain that had consumed him. He approached the door slowly, his hand hovering near the gun tucked into his waistband. The man who had contacted him was waiting inside, just as the text had said. The door creaked open, and Ethan's eyes adjusted to the dim light. In the far corner of the room stood a figure, leaning against a stack of crates. The man was wearing a hoodie, his face partially obscured by shadows. "Ethan Matthews," the man said, his voice low but steady. "I assume you're not here for small talk." Ethan didn't speak. He wasn't here to exchange pleasantries. "I need names. I need addresses. I want to know where they are." The man smiled faintly, as though he had been expecting this. "I figured as much. But be careful. Revenge doesn't fix what's broken." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't need lectures. "Just tell me where they are." The man took a step forward, handing Ethan a folder. Inside were details of the officers, everything from their last known locations to their personal routines. But Ethan wasn't interested in their lives. He was interested in their end. With a nod, he closed the folder and walked out of the warehouse. His fingers brushed the edges of the pages. The names burned into his mind. As he stepped back into the car, he knew this was it. There was no turning back now. The pieces had fallen into place. The moment Ethan's car sped down the empty streets, a shift occurred inside him. What started as grief had long since turned into something darker, something more dangerous. He wasn't the man he had been, the soldier, the protector he was gone. Now there was only a hunter. And his prey? They were the men who had taken his daughter. One by one, he would find them. One by one, they would fall. And there would be no mercy. Ethan sat in the car, the engine idling quietly in the shadows of the alley. The flickering streetlight overhead cast long, wavering shadows across the pavement. His eyes were fixed on the figure approaching on foot. A young man, nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. Officer John Miller, the rookie. The first of many. Ethan had spent the past 2 days tracking down this man. The information had been easy to find. Miller was new to the force, eager to prove himself, and was one of the officers who had entered the apartment that night. He wasn't the one who fired the fatal shot, but he had been there, part of the team that tore Ethan's world apart. The door creaked open with a quiet, almost deliberate sound as Ethan stepped out of the car. He moved swiftly, almost silently, through the darkness, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. This was the first step in his mission. He would not stop until they all paid. Miller didn't see him at first. He kept walking, oblivious to the presence lurking in the shadows. His pace quickened as the alley stretched on, the streetlight behind him casting his face in a soft, almost innocent light. Ethan watched him, his fingers brushing the cold steel of the gun at his side. But he didn't draw it yet. Just as Miller was about to pass, Ethan spoke, his voice cold and measured. "You're not getting away that easy." Miller froze, a sharp breath escaping his lips. He turned, his face pale in the dim light. His eyes locked onto Ethan, recognition flashing in them. He stumbled backward, panic rising in his chest. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. Ethan stepped closer, his figure emerging from the shadows. "I'm the father of the little girl you killed." The words hit Miller like a physical blow. His expression shifted from confusion to horror, and for a moment he said nothing. His eyes darted around the alley, as though hoping for someone to help him, but there was no one. Just Ethan and the darkness closing in. I didn't mean to," Miller stammered, his voice faltering. "It was a mistake. We didn't. No, it wasn't supposed to happen like that." Ethan's fist tightened around the handle of the gun, but he didn't pull it out just yet. He wasn't ready to end it yet. Not like this. He had to hear it, to make sure Miller knew the gravity of what he had done. What they all had done. "You didn't know?" Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. "You didn't know that a 12-year-old girl was going to be in the apartment? That she would be killed in cold blood while you barged in, guns blazing?" Miller's eyes were wide now, his hands trembling at his sides. "No, we didn't know." I swear, I was just following orders. I didn't orders. Ethan felt the anger rise in his chest, a burning heat that made his pulse spike. Orders. It was always about the orders, wasn't it? Never the consequences, never the innocent lives torn apart. The same hollow excuse that they all hid behind. Ethan took a step forward, his voice low but deadly. Your orders killed my daughter. You've got no excuse for that. Miller looked like he was about to break down. His fear was palpable, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Please, he begged, his voice cracking. I never meant for this to happen. Please, I'll do anything. Just let me go. I can help you. I'll tell you everything. Please. The desperation in Miller's eyes almost made Ethan pause. He saw the fear, the panic, and something else, a sense of guilt, perhaps. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what had been done. Ethan hesitated for a split second, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The man was begging for his life. He could let him go. Let him live with the guilt. Let the system decide his fate. But the moment he hesitated, he saw his daughter's face again, her innocent smile, her laughter that used to fill the house. He saw her lifeless body in his arms, the blood soaking into the carpet. He saw the officers standing in the doorway, their faces pale with regret, offering empty apologies. It wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. With a deep breath, Ethan moved forward, closing the gap between them. Miller flinched, but it was too late. Ethan grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close, his face inches from his. You took my daughter's life. You don't get to walk away from that. You don't get to beg for your life after what you've done. Miller's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, it seemed like he was going to collapse. But Ethan didn't flinch. There was no turning back now. He stepped back and drew the gun, the metal cold against his palm. You'll never forget the face of the man you killed. You'll never forget what you did to my family. Miller's fear was palpable, but it wasn't enough to change what had already been set in motion. Ethan took one last look at the rookie. His face twisted with fear, and then turned away. The mission was clear. The first of many. Ethan didn't look back as he walked away, the sounds of Miller's sobs echoing behind him. He didn't need to hear them. He had heard enough. The hunt had begun. Ethan's car rolled to a stop outside, a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The street was peaceful, too peaceful. Kids played in their front yards. The sound of lawnmowers hummed in the distance, and the houses were all meticulously kept. But none of that mattered to Ethan. His eyes were fixed on the home of Detective Sarah Thompson, the second officer on his list. She had been part of the raid's planning, a key figure in orchestrating the operation. Ethan knew her face from the briefings he had dug up. She was involved in the decision to target his family. To her, it was just another case. But to him, it was the moment his world had shattered. His daughter was dead, and the justice he once believed in had failed. He checked his watch. It was almost 8 p.m. The light in the living room flickered, and through the blinds, he could see Sarah and her husband sitting on the couch, their laughter muffled by the glass. They were blissfully unaware of the storm heading their way. Ethan didn't hesitate. He parked the car further down the street, out of view, and waited. He kept his eyes on the house, scanning the windows, looking for any sign of a moment when she would be alone. The seconds ticked by like hours, and his mind raced through what was coming next. The plan was simple. He would confront her, force her to face what she had done, and make her understand the consequences of her choices. Around 9:30, the front door opened. Sarah's husband stepped outside to the garage, leaving the front door ajar. Ethan seized the opportunity. He slipped out of the car and moved quickly, staying low, approaching the house with the stealth of a predator on the hunt. The tension in his chest grew with each step, the familiar burn of rage simmering just beneath the surface. He reached the front porch, then paused, waiting. He could hear Sarah moving around inside, the sound of dishes being washed. The moment had arrived. His heart pounded in his ears, but there was no fear. Only purpose. He reached for the door handle. It creaked open with ease. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Detective Thompson? His voice was low but clear. The sound of her movements stopped immediately. She froze. Who's there? Ethan stepped into the light, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the hallway. Sarah turned toward him, her face quickly shifting from surprise to suspicion. What do you want? She demanded, her hand instinctively reaching for the phone on the counter. But Ethan was faster, moving quickly to block her escape. You're not going anywhere, Ethan said, his voice cold. I'm not here to talk. Sarah's eyes narrowed. What the hell is this about? Who are you? You killed my daughter, Ethan growled, the words hanging heavy between them. He took a step closer, his fists clenched by his sides. Your plan? Your raid? My daughter's blood is on your hands. Her face flushed with anger, but it was quickly replaced by defensive fear. She stepped back, her posture stiff. You don't know what you're talking about. We were following the law. We were following orders. You're grieving. I understand that. No, Ethan interrupted, his voice growing louder. You don't understand. You don't understand what it's like to lose your child, to watch your little girl die because of a mistake. Your mistake. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came. Ethan could see her struggling to process the reality of the situation. Her hands trembled slightly, but she was trying to maintain control. She wasn't used to being vulnerable, but now, with Ethan standing in front of her, the mask of authority she wore was beginning to crack. I was just doing my job, she muttered, her voice faltering. I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear, I had no idea. We had a target, and it wasn't supposed to be you. Ethan's eyes narrowed, the pain of losing Sophia resurfacing in his chest. Your job? He repeated. Your job cost me my daughter's life. And now you stand here, trying to tell me it was just a mistake? His tone dropped, becoming dangerously low. It wasn't just a mistake. It was murder. She took a step back, her face turning pale. Please, please, you have to understand. She stopped herself, suddenly realizing there were no excuses. No justification. Ethan stared at her, his heart still raw from the night of the raid. But now, there was something else growing inside him. Justice was beyond his reach. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about making her understand the weight of her choices. His daughter was gone, and no apology, no remorse would ever be enough to fill the hole that had been left. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to reveal the list of names. He marked Sarah's name with a heavy strike, underlining it twice. You're next, he muttered, his voice carrying the full weight of his resolve. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing in the hallway, shaken and vulnerable. As he left the house, the weight of what he had just done settled over him. This was only the beginning. Ethan had been tracking Captain Richard Harris. For days, unlike the others, Harris was a shadow always in motion, always surrounded by others. But Ethan had finally caught up to him. It wasn't by accident. He had learned the captain's schedule, his routines. Harris spent his nights at the same bar, a low-lit place tucked away from the city's prying eyes. It wasn't far from his office, and Ethan had already staked out the area, watching as Harris walked in, his shoulders squared, his demeanor commanding. The man looked every part the senior officer, the one who made the calls, who signed off. On the raid that had cost Ethan everything. As Harris settled into his seat at the back of the bar, Ethan took a deep breath. His hands were steady now, but his mind was not. The years of military training had prepared him for many things, but not this. Not the feeling that gnawed at him now. Vengeance. It had become insatiable hunger, and tonight it would be sated. But something had shifted in him. A quiet, unsettling realization lingered in the back of his mind. He had been chasing this moment for so long, but now that it was here, a small part of him wondered, what next? Ethan pushed the thought aside and made his way into the bar. He kept his head down, blending in with the dimly lit room. Harris didn't notice him at first, his attention fixed on his drink, the dim light casting shadows across his face. Ethan moved silently, his steps purposeful but cautious. He approached the table, his shadow falling across Harris's face. "Captain." "Harris," Ethan said, his voice low but deliberate. Harris's eyes flicked up, recognizing him instantly. His hand froze mid-air, the glass barely touching his lips. "You!" The captain's expression tightened, but there was no fear, only a cold calculation, as if he had been expecting this moment, as though he had been waiting for the consequences to catch up to him. "You killed my daughter," Ethan continued, his words cutting through the silence of the room. The weight of them hung in the air like a storm, ready to break. Harris placed the glass down slowly, his gaze hardening. "It was a mistake, Matthews. A tragic mistake," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an apology that meant nothing. Ethan's fists clenched. "A mistake? You sent officers into my home. You tore my family apart. And you're calling it a mistake?" Harris leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface of the table. "I don't control everything, Matthews. We do what we have to do to protect the public. Sometimes people get hurt. Hurt. That was how he described it. Ethan's body trembled with the urge to do something, anything. But instead, he stood, frozen for a moment, staring into the captain's eyes. This man who had orchestrated it all. "Your daughter was collateral damage," Harris added, as if that somehow explained it all. "I didn't plan for that, but I'm not going to apologize for doing my job." Ethan's anger flared. His mind, clouded by grief, began to sharpen. This was the moment where everything came to a head. Harris had turned his daughter's death into nothing more than a statistic, a casualty of an inevitable operation. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that Ethan's daughter had been murdered, and now Harris was sitting there, justifying it as if it were no different from any other day at the office. Without warning, Ethan slammed his hand on the table. The impact rattled the glasses, and the room fell into a tense silence. Harris didn't flinch. "You don't get to sit here and make excuses." Ethan's voice was steady now, colder than before. "You don't get to hide behind your badge. You killed her. You destroyed everything." The air between them thickened. Harris's eyes flicked briefly to the door, assessing his options, but he knew he was trapped. There was no escape. Ethan stepped forward, his voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper. "I came here to make you understand the weight of what you've done. You're going to feel every bit of it." Harris looked up at him then, and for the first time, Ethan saw a crack in the captain's armor. There was something, maybe regret, maybe fear, but it didn't matter. Ethan could almost hear Sophia's laughter again, like it was just yesterday. He could almost feel her tiny hand in his, as if this moment were still a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. And now, this man, this captain, was going to pay for what he had done. Ethan's hand hovered over his weapon, but he didn't draw it immediately. For a moment, the weight of the decision hung in the balance. The line between justice and vengeance was thin, and in that moment, Ethan was consumed by a thought in the end. He didn't pull the trigger, not yet. Not until Harris understood. "You can keep hiding behind the law, Captain," Ethan said, taking a step back, his voice steady. "But you know what you did. You know exactly what you took from me." The room seemed to shrink. Harris's face was pale, but his lips remained tight. The realization hung in the air. No matter what, Ethan would make sure that Harris never walked away from this dot. Ethan turned and walked out of the bar, leaving Harris behind. But as he stepped back into the night, his heart felt heavier than ever before. Revenge had consumed him, and now there was no turning back. The city was quiet. Ethan stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking out over the sprawling lights below, but the view offered him no comfort. The skyline stretched endlessly in front of him, a reminder of everything that had been lost. The last of the officers responsible for his daughter's death was gone. Captain Richard Harris was no more than a memory, a tragic figure in the aftermath of Ethan's pursuit of revenge. He had gotten what he wanted. He had avenged Sophia's death. But as he stood there, staring at the city that now felt like a foreign place, Ethan couldn't shake the emptiness that gnawed at him. The satisfaction he thought would flood him had never arrived. The moment Harris had finally fallen, a cold emptiness had washed over him instead of the relief he expected. No joy, no triumph, just hollow victory. Ethan's fingers traced the edges of his coat. the weight of the gun at his side reminding him of the man he had become. He had told himself he was doing this for justice, for his daughter. But now, in the stillness of the night, he couldn't deny the truth. This wasn't about justice. It had been about rage. About vengeance. The reality was more crushing than he'd ever imagined. The violence he had unleashed didn't erase his pain. It magnified it. The city would go on without him, its residents grieving for the officers who had fallen, unaware of the personal cost that Ethan had paid. The world would continue to turn, but for him, it had come to a halt. There would be no closure, no peace. He had expected something to change once Harris was dead, something to shift inside of him, but there was no change. The hollow ache inside him remained, the weight of Sophia's absence as crushing as ever. The loss wasn't just of his daughter anymore. It was of the man he used to be, the man who had believed in justice, in right and wrong. Ethan sighed heavily, his breath visible in the cold night air. His fingers twitched at his side, where the gun still rested. He thought about how he'd stood there, face to face with Harris, his anger blinding him to the man's humanity. But in the end, all Ethan had done was lose more of himself. There was no redemption in vengeance. There never had been. He had become the thing he once despised. As he turned away from the edge of the building, the weight of his actions settled over him like a fog. The world was quieter now, but it was no less cruel. His daughter was still gone, and no matter how many lives he took, nothing would bring her back. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustling of leaves carried by a cold breeze. Ethan sat on the grass beside his daughter's grave, his back against the stone, his hands folded in his lap. The weight of the world felt unbearable in that moment. His eyes stared blankly at the patch of earth where she had been laid to rest, the flowers he had left earlier now wilted by time. He hadn't planned on being here, not today, not after everything that had happened. But the silence, the stillness, seemed to pull him here, as if he had nowhere else to go. He hadn't felt anything truly real since that night, and yet, sitting here now, he couldn't escape the overwhelming emptiness that had taken root in him. Sophia was gone. The officers were gone, and the world had moved on, just like it always did. Ethan had sought vengeance, convinced that it would bring him peace, that it would fix everything. But now, as he sat here, there was only the crushing realization that nothing had changed. His hands shook slightly as they rested on the gravestone. No amount of bloodshed had healed his wounds. No amount of revenge had brought Sophia back to him. She was still gone, her absence still a raw, gaping hole that no violence could fill. Ethan was no hero. He had set out on a path to bring justice, but what he had really done was destroy himself. He had become the very thing he swore to: protect his daughter from a man consumed by rage and revenge. Tears welled in his eyes, but they didn't fall. The grief was too deep, too suffocating. This was the price of vengeance. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the cold stone. For the first time since his daughter's death, he let the silence envelop him. No plans, no more targets, no more revenge. Just the quiet ache of lost Dot, and in that silence, he finally understood. There was no justice in this. Only pain. Ethan took a long, steady breath, then stood, his heart heavy with the weight of the man he had become. As he walked away, the grave of his daughter faded into the distance, a permanent reminder of the futility of seeking justice through violence.